Thank you for listening to this PodcastOne Sportsnet production, available on Apple Podcasts and PodcastOne.
It can be a little frustrating, especially if you're in a hurry or running late, to find yourself at a railway crossing waiting for a train. And if the signals are going and the train's not even there yet, you can feel a bit tempted to try and sneak across the tracks. Well, don't. Ever. Trains are often going a lot faster than you expect them to be, and they cannot stop. Even if the engineer hits the brakes right away, it can take a train over a mile to stop. By that time, what used to be your car is just a crushed hunk of metal, and what used to be you, well, better not think about that. The point is, you can't know how quickly the train will arrive. The train cannot stop even if it sees you. The result is disaster. If the signals are on, that means the train is on its way, and you need to remember one thing. Stop. Trains cannot.
The following program is a PodcastOne.com production. From Hollywood, California, by way of the Broken Skull Ranch, this is the Steve Austin Show.
Give me a hell yeah.
Hell yeah. Now, here's Steve Austin.
All right, everybody, welcome to Steve Austin Show. I am currently out on vacation, recharging batteries, but just because I'm recharging the batteries, we still got business to take care of. In the meantime, we'll be playing some of the most requested Steve Austin Show classics that have been locked away in the archives. I got a great one for you this week, and here's my producer, Sean, to tell you all about it.
Welcome to another classic episode of the Steve Austin Show. It's producer Sean bringing episode number 46, going back to double digits with The King, Jerry Lawler, WWE Hall of Famer. Original air date, September 12th, 2013. This aired originally as a two-parter, but we're just playing the first part, where Steve and Jerry start the conversation talking about the Batmobile that Jerry Lawler just purchased. That's right, Jerry Lawler purchased an honest-to-goodness Batmobile, as well as some Eddie Gilbert discussion, promos, lots of stuff, including Jerry Lawler's recovery from the heart attack that he had on Monday Night Raw in 2012. This episode was released pretty much almost a year to the day that the incident happened. So Jerry does go into detail about him having a heart attack, and we're very glad that Jerry is still with us today. This day in Steve Austin history, talking about 1992 in Columbia, South Carolina. WCW TV champion Steve Austin fought Dustin Rhodes to a time limit draw. Then we jump over to 1993 in Chicago, Illinois, one of Steve's favorite towns. WCW NWA Tag Team Champion Steve Austin defeated Ricky Steamboat in a steel cage match, and the tag team titles were up for grabs in this particular bout. It would have normally been a tag match, but Shane Douglas was injured. 1996 in Hamburg, Germany, moving to the WWF, Steve Austin defeated Savio Vega, and according to the history of WWE.com, it wanted me to tell you that Katie Lee Burchill was in attendance, aka Katrina Waters, aka Winter in TNA. And finally, in 1999 in Vancouver, British Columbia, WWF World Champion Steve Austin and The Big Show defeated The Rock and The Big Boss Man. As mentioned, I get my information from the history of WWE.com. Coming up in just a second, we're going to hear from the great Jerry Lawler on a classic episode of The Steve Austin Show.
Guys can be terrible at taking care of their health. Whether it's a knee injury, bad back, or something worse, guys are usually more comfortable rubbing some dirt on it than seeing a doctor. The same is true for erectile dysfunction. Studies show 70% of guys who experience ED don't get treated for it. Thankfully, our friends at Roman are here to help with a simple, secure way to get checked out by a doctor and get treated for ED online. With Roman, there are no waiting rooms, awkward face-to-face conversations, or uncomfortable trips to the pharmacy. Roman lets you handle everything discreetly online. All you have to do is visit GetRoman.com/Austin and complete an online visit. Then just talk to a doctor to find out what is safe and appropriate for you when it comes to ED. You'll get genuine medication delivered to your door in discreet, unmarked packaging. Again, just for listeners of the Steve Austin Show, go to GetRoman.com/Austin for a free online visit and figure out what will work for you when it comes to overcoming ED. Rubbing dirt on it is not going to fix it. One more time, that's GetRoman.com/Austin for your free online visit. Check it out.
This is the Steve Austin Show.
Jerry, how are you, man? Welcome to the show.
Well, Steve, I'm doing great. It's a pleasure to be on here with you. And you talked about your ride early on in the show, and I just want to get out of the way since we're talking about vehicles that I just made a major purchase last week. I bought a Batmobile.
What is a Batmobile?
a Batmobile is, if you remember back from 1966, the old Adam West TV show Batman.
Yeah.
It's an exact replica of that Batmobile.
Where did you find
that
at?
I was tooling around town the other night, and fortunately it doesn't pull to the left, but it's a little loud. But I was tooling around town in my Batmobile and getting quite a bit of attention the other day. So sometimes we'll have to get the Batmobile together with your Suburban, and maybe we'll have a drag race or something.
Well, I don't know what you got under the hood of that thing. I can't say we'll do it for pink slips, but we can dance here and do it for fun.
It's built on a 1979 Camaro, and it's got a 350 engine. And it's pretty awesome. It'll get up and go. A flame doesn't shoot out the back of it yet, but it'll make some noise and move on down the road.
Where did you find a replica of the Batman car? Because I'm a huge fan, but when you said Batmobile, I mean, I only knew the one that they used on the show, or however many they used on the show. So how many Batmobile clones or replicas are floating around that you may find?
That I don't know the exact answer to, but you're right. George Barris built the original Batmobile that was used back in the show in 1966 that Adam West drove around, and that original car just sold a few months ago for $4.5 million. Can you believe that? $4.5 million for that Batmobile. There's a guy that lives in Johnson, Tennessee. His name is Matt Dollar, and he has built about 6 of these. I mean, identical replicas to this car. And I was up doing a show in Knoxville called a Fanboy Convention, and Adam West was there appearing at the show. And this guy apparently he also makes the mask and the cowls for Adam West that are exact replicas of the mask, the Batman mask that he wore during the show. And then apparently Adam signs them, and they sell those for about $600 on Adam's website. But anyway, this guy brings the Batmobile around whenever at some of the shows that Adam West appears at. And I was on the show, and I saw the Batmobile, and my booth where I was signing, matter of fact, Diamond Dallas Page was there as well, and I was right across from the Batmobile. So I just, I saw this thing, I'm looking at it for 3 straight days there, and I was a huge fan, like you said you were, in the back of the old original Batman show.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I went over and I talked to Matt a little bit and got to know him. He gave me his card, and just a couple of weeks ago, I get a call out of the blue from him, and apparently he takes care of his dad up in Johnson City, Tennessee, and his dad's got to be put in a nursing home, and he's got Alzheimer's, and the guy was just, maybe needing some extra money, and it just happened to catch him at the right time, and he said, man, I'll make you a heck of a deal on that car that was at the show. And so I couldn't turn it down. I said okay, and he drove he didn't drive it, he put it on the back of a car hauler and drove it down here, and next thing you know, I look out my driveway and there's the Batmobile.
Well, how's the body work on that thing with the fins and all the molding? Lots of fiberglass work. Did they do a good job on it?
Oh my gosh, it's fabulous. It's just, it's amazing. It's just exactly like the Batmobile that you saw in the TV show. You couldn't tell it apart. I mean, all the bells and whistles. And I'm actually, there's, you know Ellis, of course, that works for WWE, the stunt guy. He wants me to bring it down to Atlanta and put it in his shop. He said he'll make it where he'll shoot a flame out the back of it and do, a little extra odds and ends on it and make it just exactly like the original Batmobile.
The flame shooting out the back end, I think I'd leave that one alone.
Yeah, you're probably right.
It's your car. I'm not asking you the dollar amount, but I know you saved your money. You were one of the guys that saved your money throughout your carear. You got a good deal on it? It wasn't too god-awful expensive?
I did get a real good deal.
I know
Steve, I saved my money, but I'm exactly like you. I heard you say we're both, I like to use the term frugal. We don't like to go and throw our money around, and that's, a lot of people don't realize in the wrestling business, and the reason so many guys, wind up in trouble at the end of their careers because we don't have the pension plan, and we don't have any insurance programs or any kind of. If you don't save your money, man, when your career's over, you look around and you don't have any more income all of a sudden, and you're in trouble. So, but and I learned that early on from my mentor Jackie Fargo. He told me he said the same words that you said early on. It's not what you make, it's what you save. And so yeah, I did save my money, and I'm still, of course, gainfully employed by the WWE, thank goodness, but but I just don't go out and throw. I wouldn't go out and just make a bunch of big, crazy, wild purchases and everything. But this was just something that I really loved, and I paid considerably less than the $4.5 million that the original went for, a lot less.
And that's the thing, you got to save your money. And I tell everybody, it doesn't matter what you do, you got to save your money. But coming up in the wrestling business, as you well know, you've been in it forever, and I'm right behind you. But you grow up. I mean, when you get in the business, you achieve what we call wrestler's mentality, where when you buy that first house or that second house, whatever, you always buy it in cash because you didn't know when you were going to get fired. You didn't know when the territory was going to close down. Didn't know what was going to happen. Didn't know when you were going to go down with an injury. So back in the day, the thing to do, when you had enough to buy a house, you paid cash money for it. These days, everybody's using them as a write-off. But back in the day, that's just the way it was. When you bought something, you paid cash. Was that the way it was with you?
Oh, absolutely. And if you'll remember, Steve, well, like you said, I mean, I started in this crazy business 43 years ago. I had my first match in December of 1970. So that's a long time ago. And the business was significantly different then. I mean, the guys were the people perceived the wrestlers as being just as big a stars as they were now, but of course it was on a more regional basis.
Right.
It was there wasn't that national or worldwide television exposure like we have now. But I can remember when the big deal, you knew you had arrived, and I don't know if this was your case or not, but if you ever made $1,000 a week when you got in the business, if you
that was the benchmark.
$1,000 in a week, you knew you had made it, and that was I can still remember. And now, now that's just like the paydays and the payoffs now are just so astronomical. It's just amazing, with guys like I don't know how many of the top guys, John Cena, Randy Orton, all the guys making millions and millions of dollars a year now. It's just it's just so different. But I mean, like you said, when you were struggling to make $1,000 a week, and to do that, sometimes, Steve, we wrestle 10 times a week, every single day, and sometimes a couple of double shots and triple shots on TV on Saturday, things like that. But yeah, $1,000 in a week was amazing back then.
I remember back in the day when I'd get my paychecks there, and we always got paid in Evansville, Indiana. And you know the deal. Everybody had their cubicles back there in that dressing room. And I would get my paychecks, and most time I never broke double digits. Every now and then I'd get into triple digits. And, dude, when you're making $15 and $20 a night, and the road schedule, the miles, it gets pretty tough. And
there was a time, and I always like to say that was when Jerry Jarrett was making the payoffs. Well, Jerry always made the payoffs.
Yeah.
It was just like to be fair to Jerry, he came up under the tutelage of Nick Goulas,
right,
who was the original promoter in the Tennessee territory, and Nick Goulas was infamous in the wrestling business for being the worst payoff guy in history. I mean, he would bring poor guys up from Mexico, and just they would want to leave, but then he would keep them so broke that they couldn't leave. So it was just that's what influenced Jerry. And like you said, that went on through, for a long time. The Tennessee territory had a bad rep for being not a place where you're going to make a lot of money. You'd be lucky, like you said, in those days, those payoffs barely cover your gas and expenses to and from the town. You're almost wrestling for nothing.
Well, basically it was. I mean, if it hadn't been for Dutch and Chris Champion riding with me, they were putting gas in the car. I was simply putting miles on my car. And, of course, I was getting the education of talking wrestling to the show and back. But, hell, things are pretty tough. I remember on my return trip, they brought me back into the Tennessee territory, and Jerry Jarrett put me on a $100 a night guarantee. I thought I had hit the big time.
You're not lying.
I hadn't been in the business too long, and then, things were going along pretty good, and I was working about 5-6 days a week, so I still never hit that $1,000 mark. One time we were there in Evansville, Indiana, got the paychecks, and normally I should see a row of 100s for that $100 guarantee, and I did not.
Uh-oh.
And I said, oh, man, so I got to talk to the man. So I said, hey, Jerry, just want to talk to you about this paycheck, man. I thought we had a deal here. And Jerry looked at me straight in the eye. He told me the way it was. And I was a young cat in the business. He goes, Steve, the territory's down. He goes, I understand. We had an agreement, but if you got to go down the road, I understand. Well, boy, I was between a rock and a hard place there, Jerry. I'm trying to learn the damn business, but we had a guarantee. I'm at my first, major financial crisis with, the promoter, owner of the territory.
Sure.
So, man, just, at the blink of an eye, I said, man, that's cool, Jerry. I said, no, I want to keep working. Maybe when the territory gets better, we can go back to our agreement. And he said, that's cool, Steve. So, I kept my job, but it was one of those split decisions that had to be made. And, we all go through that, but that was one of the crucial things. I learned a lot working in that territory, and I learned a lot working with you. But when you were talking about Nick Goulas kind of, schooling Jerry Jarrett as far as, he was the first guy in Tennessee there with that territory, and being so notoriously cheap with his payoffs, did you ever get a chance to work for Paul Bosch, who was known for very good payoffs?
No. Well, you know what? Paul Bosch, I've worked a couple of shows for Paul Bosch I think with against Gino Hernandez and Tully Blanchard and some matches there. But I didn't really get to know him. I mean, he's really, really nice guy, but I probably only worked maybe 3 or 4 shows for him.
Hey, what'd you think about Gino back in the day when you were working with him at a young age?
Oh my gosh, he was a great young talent. I mean, he and Tully Blanchard together. I can remember that being. I was thinking at that time. I mean, this guy. I thought these two guys were going to be one of the top tag teams ever in wrestling. I just thought they really had everything going for them. So, and speaking of Paul Bosch, have you ever actually received a telegram in your life?
No, I never have.
I received one in my entire life. I didn't even know they still existed. But when I slapped Andy Kaufman, well, no, it wasn't then. It was when I gave Andy Kaufman the pile driver in the match in Memphis. So few people. I mean, we didn't let anybody in on anything that was going on. Even guys in our own territory here didn't have a clue what was going on with Andy and I. And when I gave him that pile driver and he wound up in the Memphis hospital for 3 days, I got an actual telegram from Paul Bosch. And it said, "Thank you for sticking up for our business. You did a great job and a great thing, and I want to congratulate you." And I was blown away. I thought, "Oh my gosh, this is this is one of the mainstream promoters in the entire country, and he's sending me a telegram about beating up Andy Kaufman." It was amazing.
So he's thinking it was a shoot?
Yes, he was thinking, yes.
Hey, well, you know what? Along those lines, where were you when the Dr. D, David Schultz thing happened with John Stossel? He slapped the hell out of John Stossel and messed up his eardrums. Do you remember that going
David
down?
David started right here in Tennessee. Matter of fact, I helped train Jerry Jarrett, and I helped train David. He started out. He was from up in Jackson, Tennessee, 70 miles north of where I'm sitting right now here in Memphis, and just a big old raw bone country kid that just a fun-loving guy. He was
right.
Funny as heck to be around, and he just never took anything serious. But brother, he had a short fuse. I mean, he had a temper, and I don't remember where, but I remember watching. I was actually watching that on TV when he.
What'd you think?
When he slapped John Stossel, I thought, "Oh my gosh, what has he done?" You know what? I thought maybe, I didn't know. That was almost like the Andy Kaufman thing. I thought maybe it's a work, but then it didn't take long to realize that it wasn't, and that he had slapped him right in the ear, and I guess broke John Stossel's eardrum and all of this sort of stuff. And I guess eventually it cost Vince McMahon a lot of money. But you know what, David Schultz, that was just the kind of guy he was.
But that was the way the business was so back in. I mean, if anybody ever said it was fake, you stood up for it. And then John Stossel, I mean, he was back there. He was a little bit cocky in an interview. And, Dr. D, I mean, boy, like you said, I guess he had a short fuse. But, Jerry, I mean, when guys in the ring are slapping each other, we're very conscious of not popping a guy's ear. You always want to hit the cheek, in that area, or the neck, whatever. You don't want to cuff a guy on his ears. He was going for the ears and that, and he was dealing out some serious business because back in the day, that's what you did.
Yeah, and I think, don't you agree that I think that he thought that this was going to really get him over with Vince. I think he thought Vince is going to love this when I smack the heck out of this guy, But of course it wound up. I remember hearing John Stossel say on a TV interview one time that he said, "I got a nice villa in the south of France out of that deal."
Yeah, I bet he did. Hey, speaking of, looking out for the business and protecting it, you've seen a lot of things in your 43 years in the business. Remember when, like, Geraldo Rivera and several of the other cats were starting to doing these exposés on the business of pro wrestling and kind of, exposing some of the secrets. What was your thinking on that? To me, I mean, it was fascinating to me, but, I don't remember, I don't think I was in the business at that time. I mean, was it like they're kind of lifting the veil off of a kayfabe industry? And, back in the day, kayfabe is, protecting the business. Heels and baby faces ride separately. You do not associate with each other. You not drink with each other in the bar. So when they kind of started lifting the veil of the business, what were your thoughts?
Well, you're right. I mean, there was a time that was doing things like you mentioned, riding together, a good guy or babyface or heel or whatever, riding together or being seen together. You could get fired for that,
right.
at one time. But then when the secrets started to leak out different ways. Honestly, I can remember being furious about certain things. I mean, that would just the thing that really used to make me the angriest was when the dirt sheet started. Do you remember the day that those things started coming out? Oh my God! Everybody, close to the business would just hit the ceiling. But it was just one of those inevitable things. You just, and especially then with the advent of the internet and that sort of thing, this is just something that was, you couldn't do anything about it. But yeah, I mean, it pissed me off. I mean, especially the things like Geraldo Rivera. And, I just thought, I just looked at it as, hey, you know what, don't these guys have anything better to do than to go out and just intentionally try to damage somebody's business or somebody's livelihood? Because that's what that was to us.
But not only that, it was a condescending tone, which really set me off.
Oh, sure.
Because you're just trying to make, the business look like a bunch of lowlifes or idiots. I mean, the business has always been what it is. It's entertainment. It'd be like, you going and, blowing the lid off all David Copperfield stuff.
Right.
But doing it in a condescending manner. We know he's not really making stuff disappear. We're not going to make him look like an idiot because he's doing it. So that always chapped my ass. And the thing about it, going back to those dirt sheets, Jerry, I remember the first person who ever introduced me to those was Brian Pillman. And, back in the day when those things first came out, it was kind of like you didn't want to be caught reading one.
Oh, no, that was another
That was kayfabe. You don't get caught reading a dirt sheet. Don't let anybody know you're reading a dirt sheet. And then, I stayed away from them. But then all the other guys had all the inside information, so you had to read the dirt sheet to find out what the inside skinny was on so you could preserve your job.
Right, and then you also read to try to figure out who's dealing out this information, where are they getting this stuff from? That was the big talk then. I mean, it all had to come from the boys. Somebody was leaking out all of this information to these guys that were writing these sheets. And one of the first. One of the first guys that was close to one of those sheets around our territory was Eddie Gilbert, and he had some close friend that was putting out one of these things. And so there for a while, Eddie had heat. I mean, we brought him in and sat him down and talked to him until he assured us that, hey, I'm not telling this guy this stuff, but obviously somebody was somewhere, and not just in our territory, but in every territory. And, of course, and it still goes on today. Man,
Jerry, what was the bottom line with Eddie Gilbert? How did he go down?
Oh, man, you know what? I don't know other than the fact that, I was close to Eddie. It was a funny situation.
Well, I mean, he kind of modeled his whole work style after you, right?
He Tommy, Eddie's father, Tommy Gilbert,
I remember.
And I started in the business around the same time, and it was a weird thing. And I always think that Tommy sort of resented me somehow for the fact that his son grew up, instead of almost idolizing Tommy, his father, as a wrestler, he idolized and, like you said, modeled his whole career after me. And the funny thing was, then I have a son named Kevin that grew up, and he idolized Eddie Gilbert. It was a weird, and went to work for Eddie even when Eddie went up and started helping to promote up in Philadelphia. My son Kevin went up there and worked for Eddie when he could have worked here in our own territory. But Eddie was just Eddie and all of the Gilberts. I mean, his brother Doug still works for us. He got a match coming up with us and later on this month down at the Resorts Casino, but they've I don't know, the personality. They're just different kind of guys. Eddie was like his dad Tommy in the fact that he was a moody kind of guy.
Right.
You had to catch him if you caught him in the wrong mood, things didn't go well or whatever. But I loved being around Eddie. Absolutely loved working with him because I swear it was like working. It was like working with myself. He was such almost a clone or a mirror image of my work style, and it just a tremendous talent. And I honestly had no idea that that Eddie was and I guess it was Somas, was using the Somas, the muscle relaxers, that sort of thing. But you know what, and you know this as well as I do, Steve. We've had so many deaths in the wrestling industry connected to Somas, and a lot of people say, "Oh, these guys are all drug users or whatever." But the truth of the matter is, and I know it's true in the case of Eddie and in all of these guys, that you didn't look at that as a drug. You looked at it as simply as a muscle relaxer. I mean, you could not get any one of those guys to say, "Oh yeah, I'm on drugs," because they took Somas. I mean, a lot of times these things were prescribed by doctors, and because you'd get beat up every night, and you'd be hurting, you'd have aches, you'd have pains, and these guys looked at that as just a way to as a way to deal with your aches and pains, and what I think. One thing, when you're in this business, you feel like you're invincible. You feel like you're Superman, especially when you're a young kid in the business. You feel like nothing wrong can ever happen to you. So what happened, I think, with those Somas is they don't realize that a muscle relaxer is just that. The more you take, the more it's going to relax your muscles. But you forget that your heart is a muscle.
Yeah.
It's a major muscle in your entire body that keeps you running. And if you take too many muscle relaxers, what happens in those cases is your heart just relaxes and it slows down until it just stops beating. And the guys never thought about it like that, I'm sure.
It was always, I think, a quest for, how high can you get? And, how high can you get? Too high. And, bad things happen when you reach that level.
Alexa isn't the only one with breaking news. Make sure to hang around at the end of this podcast for the latest breaking headlines on the AP News Minute.
Hey, it's Adam Carolla letting you know about my newest podcast, Going Racing. Me and Matt, the moderator, DeAndrea, that is. We'll highlight the fastest cars. We'll talk about the best races and the best celebrities in motorsports. Subscribe now at PodcastOne.
This is the Steve Austin Show.
Jerry, as long as I've known you, with all the traveling and everything else, you were a guy who never drank or did any drugs, correct?
That's absolutely right. I mean, I like to tell people nowadays, I was what do they call it, straight edge way before CM Punk.
You was straight edge before straight edge was cool.
Right, exactly. And you know what, Steve? I really don't know why. I can look back and say part of it, I guess, was my upbringing. My parents really were. I mean, they never really actually sat down and talked to me about drinking, which drinking was the main thing.
Right.
Back in the day when I was a teenager or anything. It just wasn't done in my house, and I knew they frowned on it. And I grew up. I was real fortunate when I grew up in the 50s and 60s. We had. Literally, the neighborhood I lived in was almost like a Leave It to Beaver environment.
Right.
It was back in the day. My dad worked at the Ford Motor Company on the assembly line building Ford cars, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom. I had a brother that was 4 years older than me, and we just grew up in a neighborhood where there were, on my particular street that we lived on in Memphis, there were 12 other boys about the same age as my brother and I, and all we did all the time was we just played. We didn't go out and get crazy. We played a lot of ball. We did wrestling. We did boxing. We did football, baseball, everything in our neighborhood together. And I think usually what happens is when people fall into this stuff, it's always peer pressure. It always falls back on the crowd you hang with. And I was just fortunate enough that when I grew up, we had a bunch of guys on my neighborhood that grew up together that were all that we just didn't get in with the wrong crowd. We didn't do that.
But then,
I've never in my life had a sip, not even a taste of beer, wine, whiskey, any alcohol. Never taken any drugs. Never smoked marijuana or even a cigarette at all. Never had one in my mouth. So and it, it's not like you said. It's not necessarily all that cool, but I do feel like it has had a lot to do with the longevity that I've had. I mean, there aren't many guys that are 63 years old that are still relevant in the business, and can still climb in the ring and have a match and do all of that sort of stuff. So I think it's helped me throughout my career, and of course I certainly didn't wind up like a lot of these guys that abuse those drugs.
Yeah, but take me through this. I mean, I certainly had part of my act as Stone Cold Steve Austin was drinking a lot of beer, and I drank a lot of beer. When I wasn't at work, I drank whiskey, but I always kept. There was a couple of times where I was living a little fast, and inevitably I slowed down, and started smartening up. You don't last a long time living like I was living, but I wasn't totally, batshit crazy or out of control. I was just living too fast. Help me understand how a guy who has never smoked, drank, took any pills, done anything, what are you thinking when all the boys are together and everybody's getting all shit-faced and you're the only straight cat in the room, in the territory, or anywhere?
You know what? I still am this way today. I never really, and I don't know if you can remember this during the time that you were in our territory. I never really hung out with the boys. My friends were always guys outside the business. I never went to, like after the matches were over, I just get home as quick as I could. I never went to bars. I never hung out at clubs. I didn't do any of that. I would play softball or flag football during the week when other guys would be hanging out at the bars. I'd be talking with my guys that I played sports with and everything. I still play. We're starting our fall softball league next Tuesday. I still play every single week softball or flag football or that sort of stuff. And I just didn't hang out with the wrestlers. And not that I thought bad of them or anything.
No.
But I just I don't know. I just didn't think anything good could come of that.
You've had a million matches, and you've had some incredibly high-profile matches. So, dude, take me, for me, coming out of the ring, it's just an adrenaline spike. It had to have been the same for you. So what was your post-match process?
Man, I can tell you, like in the summertime, I usually, especially like driving back, we wrestled in Louisville or Evansville on a Tuesday night or a Wednesday night. I would jump in my car immediately and turn on the radio and tune it to 1100 AM, which was a Clear Channel radio station out of Cleveland, and tune in the Cleveland Indians baseball game. And I would listen to that all the way home, drink a Diet Coke or at that time just a regular Coke. I'd stop at McDonald's, get me a couple of double cheeseburgers and a large order of fries and a big Diet Coke, and listen to the Cleveland Indians all the way home. Those guys, listening to those ball games at night in that Clear Channel radio station, I'm sure saved my life many times because it kept me awake on these long trips every single night. But I was just, I was always so into other sports and everything that I just didn't I just didn't take the time or get messed up in dealing with like drinking after the shows or anything like that. I was just always interested in getting home as soon as I could and spending as much time at home as possible.
Let's talk about the heart attack on Monday Night Raw, September 10th in 2012. Monday Night Raw, was it soon into the broadcast, middle of the show? Take me through this. What happens? Do you start feeling dizzy? Was there any lead up to this? What happened that night?
Well, if anybody remembers that night, I had a match. A lot of times, and I love it when they do it. They would include me in the show some sort of way and involve me in a match, and still do the commentary at the same time. So start out the show doing the commentary, and then they had me involved in a match where It was me and Randy Orton against CM Punk and Dolph Ziggler. And so I remember, I got up and I went up and did the match, and I've watched it back several times. It was a hell of a match. I mean, I'm always conscious of when I'm in there with those guys. Hey, you got to hang with these young guys, man.
Right.
This is a young man's business, and it's just a thrill to be included in a match every now and then on here. So, but you don't want to look out of place. You don't want to look like, oh my gosh, what's this guy? Why they got this guy in there? So, I'm looking at the match, and I'm jumping doing dives off the second rope, and all of these sorts of things, drop kicks, and that. And everything went fine in the match. I do remember, Steve, and I'll still say that this was the partial cause of this thing. I remember, and if you watch Dolph Ziggler's matches, this guy's amazing young talent.
Yes.
Great, and he's really energetic, and he's really enthusiastic, and sometimes he gets a little overly enthused, and he does this move where he'll drop 10 straight elbows on his opponent, get you down. Well, he had me down in the middle of the ring, and he starts dropping these elbows. And I remember at about number 6 or 7, I'm thinking, what the hell happened to the day when we used to be able to do this and not kill our opponent? Right? I actually remember thinking that because he was dropping these elbows with every bit of his weight, and I'm thinking, Jesus, this guy's trying to kill me. And so, he goes through 10 of those, and then of course we finished the match. Oh gosh, Randy Orton and I we won the match, and then I come back over and I sit down doing commentary, and I felt fine. Everything was great.
Right.
And literally, it was the strangest thing, and it's still even strange to talk about it because I'm sitting there. Then I think the next match started, which was Kane and Daniel Bryan against the Titus O'Neil and Darren Young, I believe. Anyway, I remember that match is going, and literally, Steve, I promise you, it's as if I'm watching that match and I'm talking to Michael Cole, I'm doing the commentating, and it was as if I'm looking up at the ring and I blink my eyes, and when I open them again, I was in the hospital with a ventilator down my throat, my girlfriend at my side in Montreal, Canada, and it was 2 days later.
Wow.
I mean, I had no warning. I had no bad feeling. A lot of times people say, oh, you'll have tingling in your arm, you'll have tightness of your chest or hard to breathe or anything. Nothing. Literally, it was like, I blinked my eyes, I woke up 2 days later. And I honestly believe, and in talking to my cardiologist, I think that those elbows may have had an effect. In other words, what I had was a sudden cardiac arrest. It
Right.
It was not the typical heart attack that was caused by blockage or clogged arteries or anything like that. It was just, and people suffer these. They say somebody dies every 90 seconds in the United States of a sudden cardiac arrest, and there's no rhyme or reason to it. It's just your heart stops for one reason or other, and if there's not some way to get it started again, you're dead, And had this happened to me an hour later or 2 hours later, and I'd been driving or been back in my hotel room by myself, that would have been it. I would have been gone. Just fortunately, our Dr. Mike Sampson, our ringside physician, was right there next to me, and the paramedics in the back gave me CPR. My heart just stopped. I mean, it didn't start beating again for 20 minutes. They worked on me and gave me CPR for 20 straight minutes until they finally hit me with the defibrillator with those paddles 7 times before they got my heart started again. But the funny thing was, when you have a sudden cardiac arrest and your heart stops, if you have the proper CPR, and they can get your heart started back again, a lot of times it just kicks right back in, and there's no damage. And it's not like, it's not like to where your heart, if you had a clogged artery and suddenly part of your heart is deprived of blood flow and oxygen, and that part just dies off. Well, I didn't suffer any damage to my heart, no scarring or anything like that. Thanks to the CPR, but once they got my heart started back again, it was as if it didn't happen.
Well, I remember hearing about it happen.
I felt from that moment on, and until today, if I didn't know it happened, you couldn't convince me that I really had a heart attack.
Well, I remember hearing about it, through the news, and all of a sudden, everybody thought, oh, when he comes around, he's going to have some brain damage, and you didn't. You returned back to normal.
Well, I think that was because that was. The word went out that my heart didn't beat for 20 minutes.
Right.
And I think what most people figured was my brain and the rest of my body was deprived of blood flow because, of course, that's what your heart does for that 20 minutes. But thank God it was Mike Sampson, our WWE doctor, and 2 other paramedics from there in in Montreal, and they took turns. I mean, because they did it with such force,
they're blowing up.
Cracked one of my ribs.
Oh yeah.
And they did it with such force. It would have been impossible for one person to do that continuously for 20 minutes. But the three of them were able to take turns and keep that blood with that pressure, keep the blood flowing throughout my body and to my brain, that I suffered no ill effects whatsoever.
All right, so check it out. You're waking up in the hospital. You got a breathing tube down your throat. What are you thinking? You see your girl there. I mean, the last thing you remember is watching the match.
Right.
What's going through your mind?
Well, and my girlfriend and I, Lauren, had been in Aruba the week before on a wrestling, did a wrestling show down there and a sort of a kind of combination vacation, working trip to Aruba. And I didn't remember, when was going through my mind was I didn't immediately remember the match or that I had been at Monday Night Raw when it happened, and I couldn't even talk with that thing down my throat. So I was trying to write, and we've saved it. I've still got it over here somewhere in the stack of papers. The note that I wrote to her, and the first thing I wrote was, "Are we in Aruba?" I thought we were possibly still there. I didn't remember that part.
Yeah.
And then she explained to me, but a lot of the stuff I don't remember. And they say that's one of the things that is an after effect of your heart not beating for that length of time. Sometimes you don't remember everything, but it's come back and it's just was the weirdest thing. I feel like I'm the luckiest person in the world. But I do honestly, and I talked to my cardiologist about it, and he said, absolutely, the trauma to my chest from those elbows could have knocked my heart. Could have been hard enough to kind of knock your heart out of rhythm.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't know, and it would start slowly, and then just get more and more and more out of rhythm until it just seized up.
Your heart is in a cattywampus state, as we would say on a Steve Austin show. So what's the prognosis? You're good. You're back at work. You're feeling 100%. You're good to go?
I absolutely feel 100%. As a matter of fact, I want to go in and sit down with Vince and say, hey, I want to come back and do something on the show. I would love to get back involved with, and have a match or two on Raw or at a pay-per-view.
You still want to get back in the ring?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Definitely still want to.
You ain't got that out of your system yet?
Yes.
You still haven't got that out of your system?
No, never. Steve, I don't know how it is with you, but I never got into this business ever for 1 minute thinking that I'd be a commentator.
Right.
I love the wrestling aspect of the business, and that's the only reason I wanted to be in it, and that's all I ever wanted to be. The commentating just happened one day when Randy Macho Man Savage jumped ship, and he and Vince McMahon had been doing the commentary together, and Randy was the color guy, and I remember I think we were up in the Pocono Mountains getting ready to do Raw, and if you remember, WCW during the Monday Night Wars came on like an hour before Raw did.
Yeah.
And we were all sitting around. I remember hearing Vince say, "Somebody get Randy, and so we can go over something here on the show." And suddenly, I think it was Howard Finkel came in and said, "Vince, look at the TV." And they turned the TV on, and there was Macho Man.
Oh, wow.
Standing there on WCW television. He had left with no warning, no notice or anything like that. And that night, Vince came to me and said, "King, would you jump in here and help me do the color commentary tonight?" He said, "I'll just do it for one night, and I'll have somebody else next week." And, of course, that's been 20 years ago.
Golly, man. I mean, obviously you always want to be a pro wrestler, as did I, but, sometimes you get dealt a different set of cards. So,
right.
Luckily, you had the gift of gab.
Well, yeah, I mean, and you know what, I think a lot of times people ask me, give me some tips or give me some insight as to what it would take to be successful at that. And I swear, Steve, it was like, I never really thought about it. I never really took it serious. I sort of had fun with it. I always cracked jokes and was, I always looked at myself as being, during my wrestling promos, I always tried to be witty and
right.
make fun of my opponents and jokes and that sort of thing. So I just threw those in with the color commentary and it just worked. And I still to this day, poor Michael Cole, I look over when we sit down on Monday nights and get ready to do the show, and he's got 100 different notes that he's had to write out and be prepared and do all this preparation for the show. And I just show up and sit down and start talking like I'm sitting next to my two next-door neighbors, and we're sitting watching Monday Night Raw, and that's the way I've always looked at it, and just have fun with it. I never try to take it too serious, and fortunately, for all this time, that's worked for me.
But, your quick wit, your sense of humor is obviously, one of your strong suits. But I like to go back to your promos because every now and then someone will say, oh, yeah, let's talk about the top 10 greatest promo guys. I always put you in the top 5 because of the way you could break down a story, lay out the situation, talk about your guy, put him over, sell the situation, the title at stake or whatever. I always thought you got a hell of a promo. And there's a difference between selling tickets, selling your opponent, selling that match, than just being an infomercial.
Well, you're exactly right, and all I can do, I can just look back and think of the guys that were in the business when I started. That's who I tried to emulate, and the main one was like I said, the guy that was originally my mentor, Jackie Fargo. He told me so many things, and I don't think I just went out there and didn't ever make mistakes and didn't ever say the wrong thing, because I did. But fortunately, Jackie Fargo, when I came back to the dressing room, he would pull me to the side. I'll never forget one time I said something about him being old. And
right.
Literally, when I walked back into the when I walked back into that dressing room, he literally grabbed me by my shirt and pulled me over just where just he and I could talk. And he said, "Let me tell you something, punk." He said, "You went out there and called me an old man." He said, "How's that going to make you look when an old man whips your ass Monday night?"
Right.
And I never forgot things like that. And it just, it made me. You could always make fun of your opponent, but you didn't ever put them down to a point where, because you always wanted to make your opponent seem like, hey, they were the greatest thing ever. So that if you beat them, you really beat somebody, or if they beat you, you were beat by somebody. You didn't want to. And a lot of guys never really grasped that way of thinking on their promos. But yeah, Jackie Fargo would he would guide me along through things like that, and then it just you're right about telling stories. A lot of guys will just go out there and talk about themselves, and that's okay. But you got to tell a story. That's what the people want. They want you to explain what is going on and why you feel the way you do about who you're about to wrestle. And the other thing too was that Jackie Fargo would always tell me was to try to make it personal.
Right.
I mean, and that, Jerry Jarrett and I, when we used to book the territory, he had a big sign hanging in his office that said, "Personal issues draw money." He had that made on a sign. He had it hanging up in his office, so that when we were doing the booking, you used to always try to remember things like that. And it just doesn't take so much. I mean, if the one thing that got me, and I never thought that I would I went so long, I never thought that I would get to wrestle at WrestleMania.
Right.
But finally, I had that match, and thank you. I don't know if I ever really got to say thank you for agreeing to referee that match, because that really made that match seem so much more important than it was. But the reason that I got to have a match at WrestleMania against Michael Cole of all people was because we had a personal issue.
Right.
My mom had passed away, and Michael said some, and still to this day I have to defend him. He never said one derogatory thing about my mom. They never went out there and said anything that I had a problem with.
Right.
But just because of the fact that they talked about my mom, and it was that sensitive and that close to her passing away, it made it personal. And everybody out there could relate to that. They could say, "Man, I know how I would feel if somebody said something about my mom after she had passed away." And that was a personal issue, and it led into Michael Cole and I getting a match at WrestleMania, because the people got into that. And people get into personal issues, and that's what I always tried to make my promos into something more than just a match. I try to make it personal.
Who did you like on the microphone, other than, like I said, I've got you as a great promo. I know you like Nick Bockwinkel. Who were some of the other guys and throughout your 43 years that you thought cut a damn good promo?
Oh my gosh, Steve, there's so many of them. Hey, I mean, and I'm not saying this because I'm on the show with you, but your promos were, they were in the top 5. I mean, they were always great. They were always right on the money. They were personal in the fact that you were literally speaking for the masses. You were the first guy to come along in this business that was so anti-establishment and anti-authority, and you spoke and said and did things that everybody out there watching wanted to be able to do or say, but they couldn't. So they lived vicariously through your interviews. And when when you'd call Vince McMahon a son of a bitch, oh my gosh, it was tremendous. I mean, that sort of stuff was great. So I loved all of your interviews. Maybe my all-time favorite was Terry Funk.
Right.
To me, Terry Funk's interviews were personal. They were hilarious. I've seen it. Terry Funk, when he and I had to run down there in Memphis, we had a lot of matches, the empty arena match and some title matches.
I got to ask you about the empty arena match later, but go ahead.
Okay, but I saw him cut a promo on me. What was funny? We did the empty arena match up in Memphis, and it got a lot of press and that sort of thing. And at the time, Terry's brother Dory Funk was booking down in Florida, so he brought Terry and I down and did a run around Florida. And Dusty Rhodes was the main event, and we were like the semifinal every night. But what Terry did one night, he was going to cut a promo about me and the upcoming match, and he had the camera guy come into a little shower stall down there, and he had a can of 40-weight motor oil and a big bag of dirt and sand and stuff, and he's looking right in that camera, and he said, Jerry Lawler, I always wondered why you wanted to be like these Florida crackers. I always wondered why you wanted to live down here and be among these people. I wanted to know what it felt like to be a Florida cracker. So today I'm going to know that feeling. And he picks this can of motor oil up and he just pours it over his head, all down his face, into his mouth, and he's spitting out motor oil as he's talking. He says, these Florida crackers are greasy. They're oily, slimy human beings. And then he takes this dirt and he dumps it over his head after he's got all of this motor oil running down him, and he just covers himself in this dirt and sand. And he said, now I know what it feels like to be a Florida cracker. I'm just sitting outside the stall behind the cameraman watching this interview, and I thought, this guy is just tremendous. To me, he was the best interview guy that I thought ever in the business. But there's been so many great ones. The Rock, The Rock the interviews were great. And hey, in his day, and you can't argue with the fact. Hey, Hulk Hogan's interviews at one time were good. That's you talk about talking fans into the arena. Hulk Hogan was able to do that, man. There's been so many great guys. That's just hard for any one particular, other than Terry Funk, to come to mind right now.
Yeah, I got into also, kind of the superstar Billy Graham, Dusty Rhodes thing. I thought Dusty Rhodes was highly inventive and could.
Oh my gosh, there's another one. You could never tire of listening to Dusty Rhodes do an interview. Never.
But when you went to do your promos, you booked a lot. But did you take time and think, okay, let me break this down and think how I want to phrase this, or did you just, hey man, just start talking and lay it all down?
Well, I'll tell you what. In our days of Memphis TV. It was always live every Saturday morning, 11 o'clock, Channel 5 in Memphis, and you knew who you were going to wrestle, and you knew what the interview was going to be about, or who the interview was going to be about. And I'll be honest with you, I would sit down on Friday nights or run it through my head on Friday nights as I was driving back from wherever. A lot of times I would wrestle in Atlanta on Friday night and catch an early flight back to Memphis, and then go straight over to TV. But no, I would definitely sit down and write out my interview. I would look at. I will never forget. Jimmy Cornette will relate to this because he bought the same book. But there was a book by this guy named Leo Safian, and it was called 1,001 Insults. And it was just a little paperback book. I don't know where I found it, but brother, I used every one of those 1,001 insults.
I remember you having that. You used to carry it in your briefcase.
Exactly. I have used every one of those 1,001 insults 10,000 times. It was the greatest book I've ever. It is probably as much a part of my success as anything you can think of. But yeah, I would sit down and I would write out my interviews on Friday night, and and I think a lot of guys didn't. I think a lot of guys at the time didn't do that. And well, they didn't really have the ability to do that because they didn't. Most of the guys at TV, they would just get there on Saturday morning and find out who they were working with or who they needed to talk about and make the interview about. I always had the luxury of knowing, and so I would sit down and prepare and write out, and sometimes even practice it in a mirror or whatever, my interviews, to make sure that they were on the money.
But that being said, I mean, you were writing down bullet points, or you might write out an entire promo. You go over it a few times, know it, and not just go out there and try to spit it out verbatim, not try to memorize it. It was a living, breathing promo when it came time to execute.
Oh, absolutely. Right.
Because that memorization thing is killing me. And, you know, I know you're in the system today. Of course, I'm still a part of WWE. But when I see a lot of these cats try to memorize promo, I look at them, I shake my head because, you know, you can have a bunch of things that sound great, but you got to believe them. And if you're just trying to spit this stuff out because you memorized it, but you don't really believe it and you're unsure of yourself, and you can see that behind the person's eyes, it ain't a good promo.
Yeah, you're right. And you know what's sad is sometimes, you know, not in the far too distant past, you'd be walking around the back and you'd see somebody like Ric Flair sitting there with an interview that somebody else had written for him, and he's trying to memorize it. And I mean, you know, here's another one of the guys that I failed to mention, one of the greatest interviews of all time, a guy like Ric Flair. Why on earth would you think that Ric Flair needs to have an interview written for him, other than the time factor or something like that? You know, I mean, if he's going to be on television, you know Ric Flair, you know what you're going to get from him. Let him go out there and be Ric Flair.
All right, let's give it up for TrueCar for being a loyal sponsor of the Steve Austin Show. With TrueCar, 60 seconds is all you'll need to get an offer for your car. In the amount of time it takes to floss your teeth, pet your dog, or do a few sit-ups, you can get a true cash offer. Best of all, you can do it from your smartphone or even from home. Just go to TrueCar and simply enter your license plate number and watch how your car's details pop up. Answer a few questions and you'll get an accurate true cash offer from a local TrueCar certified dealer. It's that easy. After that, you can bring your car in and they'll check it out with you together. You can ask questions to get the answers you need so there's no surprises. Then simply leave with your check or trade in your car for a new ride. So when you're ready to experience a better way to sell or trade in your car, check out TrueCar today. True cash offer is not available in all areas. And hey man, you're going to need car insurance for your vehicle. Go to geico.com and in 15 minutes you could be saving 15% or more on car insurance. That's right, save hundreds of dollars on car insurance at geico.com. Extra money in your pocket? It may just be the most rewarding thing you do today. All right, I'm giving Sean a go-home cue, so let's wrap it up for this week. Make sure you check out PodcastOne.com and subscribe to The Steve Austin Show so you don't miss any of these classic episodes. Before I ride off in the sunset, I do want to throw out a couple of plugs. I still got a beer. It's the Badass Broken Skull IPA, the finest IPA in the United States of America, and that's the bottom line. Made by El Segundo Brewing Company. You can find Broken Skull IPA at Whole Foods and Total Wines if you live in Cali. If you ain't in Cali, you're probably SOL. And if you're looking to get a badass pocket knife, I got two for you. Cold Steel Broken Skull Knife, Cold Steel Working Man Knife. Get them at my Amazon store. Amazon.com/shop/Steve Austin, or go to the Cold Steel Knives website and check out all their badass knives. Also, one more big shout out to all my sponsors to make this show possible. That's how I'm able to bring this show to you free twice a week. Please support them because they support us. For more info, check out the podcast description to this episode for details. Folks, I am on social media, Twitter and Instagram, at Steve Austin BSR. Folks, I'll be back soon, but until then, my name is Steve Austin, and I will catch your ass down the road.
This has been a Podcast One production. Download new episodes of The Steve Austin Show every Tuesday at PodcastOne.com. That's PodcastOne.com.